Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be playing with a technique that I haven't done in a very long time but I absolutely love, and that is using Distress Oxide inks along with the Distress Glaze to create really cool and unique backgrounds. I have done this technique before to create water backgrounds, but this time we're going to use the technique to create both a pinkish corally red panel as well as a green panel to use with the new watermelon slice die. So you're going to need some Distress Oxides to do this. You need alcohol ink cardstock, which is a glossy cardstock. You need that glossy finish for this to work. You also need the Distress Glaze and then an ink blending tool. So I have all my supplies ready. And what I'm doing is I'm spraying water generously over all of those inked areas. So I just took my ink pads, and for this one I have Abandoned Coral, Worn Lipstick, and Picked Raspberry, and I just smushed them onto the craft mat. Once I sprayed them with water, you can see now that I'm pressing the cardstock panel in there, I have a really nice watery mix of both the ink as well as the water. So I am using the glossy side down when I'm doing this, and I'm just kind of throwing the panel on there and pressing it in until I have ink on the whole entire panel. There's no rhyme or reason to this, there's no right or wrong way. You just pretty much want to make it look like a hot mess, and then you want to completely dry it with your heat tool. That is the main key to this whole technique, is making sure that every single layer that you create is completely dry before you move on to the next one. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow the colors to stay true in their color form and not have them kind of mix together as you continue to add more color. And you can see at this point I haven't added any more ink to my craft mat there. I've had quite a bit there that I could work with, so I'm just continuing to dry the panel and then press it back down into that ink. And one of the great things I love about this technique is as the ink starts to dry on the craft mat, you can see we have areas where it's a little bit more concentrated and you have tiny drops and it's not a lot of water. And what that does is when you put the panel into those areas, it gives you that really bold speckled look, which I absolutely love. And in the end, when we apply the glaze, you're really going to see all of those speckles come to life. Now, as you continue to do this, you're going to notice that it looks really chalky, really faded, and it doesn't really look like we have all of the color that we've been adding on this panel. But I promise you it's there. You just need to be patient and continue to add the layers until you're happy with the final result. So I am now. I think I have enough ink on here. I like the kind of mix of colors and the little bit of speckling I have. So now is the magical part, and this never gets old for me. It is so unique every single time you do it, and I love the vibrant colors that come out. So it just so happens that your Distress ink blending tool fits perfectly into the glaze bottle. So I just put it in there and just kind of do a couple twists to get that glaze onto the little foam. And I always use a new foam when I do this because the color will transfer to your foam. So you'll have both the glaze as well as the color on that foam piece. So I recommend just using one per panel and then just kind of swapping it out. And you can see now that I've added a tiny bit of that glaze in the corner, the vibrant, beautiful pink corally colors that are emerging. This is such a cool technique. I love the final result, and I love the look of this with the watermelon die because it really gives us a really neat, realistic look and almost makes it look like it's watery. So I just think it is so cool. So you just kind of want to go around and move that ink blending tool in a circular motion until you've done the entire panel. And then once you have it completely finished, I also like to go in with a paper towel or a cloth and just kind of give it a wipe across the surface, which will help to remove any of that extra glaze that's kind of sitting on top. Don't go too crazy, you just kind of want to dab it and give it a little bit of a wipe, and then I like to set it aside to let it fully dry. So when you create these panels, you can create them with the intention of using the entire panel. Some of them are so pretty you don't even want to cover them up. But for our card today, we're going to be doing some die cutting. So I'm actually going to get 3 cards out of the 2 panels I'm going to create. So we'll get to those in a little bit here. But I need to do the green version of this panel as well. So now I've taken some new Distress Oxides. I've completely cleaned off my craft mat. I have Cracked Pistachio, Twisted Citron, and Mowed Lawn to start. And I just did the same thing as I did with the pinks. I put the color down onto the craft mat. I sprayed water generously over top to get a lot of water onto that craft mat. And now I'm just going to repeat the same process and keep applying ink and heat setting it. So you can see I definitely have this very sped up, but it does take a little bit of time to do all of the color and then the heat setting. But it is totally worth it to get the final result with all of those colors. Now, as I was going along here, I thought that this was a little bit too light green. Now, it's going to get way darker when I finish it, but I wanted this to be a really vibrant green when I finished. So I decided to bring in a little bit more ink onto my craft mat, and I also included some Lucky Clover. Now, this is a very greeny type blue. It's kind of a really dark turquoise, so I love the contrast that it added with all of the different green colors that we had. And then to finish it off, I put a lot of the Mowed Lawn color just to really green it up to make it look like the watermelon rind when we're finished. So I'm just finishing this panel up here. I'm very happy with the different speckles and all of the color I've added. And now we're going to do the same magical. We're going to take that glaze on a new foam piece and we're going to apply it to the panel. Now this one to me was even more magical than the pink. I was so amazed by the greens that came out of this as I started to add the glaze. I love seeing the cloudy on one side and then that vibrant color on the other side as you add the glaze. It is just such a neat technique. So you can see there as I'm lifting it up, I'm showing the difference and you can see that vibrant color there in the corner. So once again, I'm going to take that foam blending tool. You don't need to add more glaze to this. Doing a couple turns in your glaze bottle will add enough to the foam piece that you can fully do an entire panel. And as we continue on with this one here, look at the amazing color that we are unveiling. I love all of the splotches of green. I love that speckled detail. And I was really happy that I added in that Lucky Clover because it just gives a little hint of turquoise mixed in with the green. So it really adds a nice amount of contrast. So I just finished up with the glaze there and I'm going to once again take a paper towel and I'm just going to wipe off the surface, which just removes that extra glaze that's kind of sitting on top. And then once I have that done, I'm going to set this one aside with the pink and we can go ahead and start to work on our cards. Now I'm only going to fully assemble one card in the video. I mainly wanted to show you how to create the distressing panels and then show you what they look like when we turn them into watermelons. Now I will show you all three of the cards once we get a little bit farther in the video, but let's go ahead and look at how we created the first card. Okay, so I have a white cardstock panel here that measures 4 inches by 5 1/4, and I'm taking some squeezed lemonade distress ink and I'm applying it through the mini staggered circle stencil. Now I'm just applying the ink through the center area. I want to have it really dark in the center and kind of have these dots fade off as I make my way out towards the edges of the panel. And I like to just kind of lift my stencil as I'm adding the ink to make sure that I'm getting the coverage that I want. Having that tape on the other side helps to hold it in place, but being able to lift it up really ensures that I get all of the color that I was hoping to get as I'm adding the color through the stencil. Once I was happy with that, I went ahead and removed the stencil and all of the tape. And now you can see that I've done my first die cut from our panel. So we're going to actually, like I mentioned, get 3 cards from these 2 panels. And the first one here is going to use this watermelon shape, which is from the new Watermelon Slice Dynamics. And I've cut out both the rind area as well as the pink area. Now I also took the die and I cut it out of black cardstock so I could get the little seeds that I can inlay back into the watermelon. And I also cut out the white rind piece that goes on it as well. To inlay the little watermelon seeds, I find it very easy to just take a double-sided adhesive and add it to the back of the watermelon, which is going to expose that adhesive on the front as well. And then I just take off the backing paper and adhere it to the watermelon piece. I'm just going to move it here onto my card panel so I can really see to line this up. And now I have that adhesive already underneath there so I can easily add all of those seeds in there. The seeds aren't super small, they do look teeny tiny, but they're a pretty good size, so I didn't find them too difficult to place back in. I just used my tweezers since I found that a little bit easier, and I just kind of lifted each one up and just tucked them into those spaces, and the adhesive that we already have in place is making sure that they're adhering inside of there. I then added a little bit of liquid glue to the white piece of the rind, and I'm just adding that directly on top, and that is going to complete our little watermelon piece. And you can see when I kind of hold it up here, all of the beautiful colors and the mix of colors, it is just gorgeous. And because it's that glossy paper, we have a little bit of shine to it as well. I just love how realistic it looks, and I love all of the different shades of color that we achieve by doing that technique. So now that I have the watermelon piece done, I can go ahead and work on the sentiment. So I'm going to be using the Sweet Dynamics, which is a 2-piece die set that has both the spelling of the word sweet as well as the shadow. And I'm also going to use the Sweet Sentiment stamp set to stamp a sentiment directly underneath of there right on the panel. So I'm just using some black ink and I stamp that on there, and then I'm going to adhere the little sweet piece onto the card as well, along with the watermelon, both with foam adhesive. So I'm making sure to put quite a bit of foam adhesive on the watermelon piece just because we did add a lot of color and water and heat, so it has a little bit of warping to it. So having foam adhesive on the entire back just really helps to make sure it adheres nice and even. And then I also added some adhesive onto the little sweet word as well, making sure to add foam adhesive on the areas that don't overlap the watermelon. That will just ensure that everything sits nice and flush and all of our pieces are the same height. Then the last thing we need to do on here is just add the sweet word that we've die cut from white cardstock. I love the contrast of the black and white with that really bright pop of color on the watermelon, and I think it's just a really cool effect to have everything layered together over top of that little subtle polka dot background that we created with the yellow ink. Now the last thing we need to do here is just add everything to a card base. So I'm going to add the panel first to a Limelight piece of cardstock just to give it a very small mat around the edges, just to add a little bit more pop of color. And then I'm going to add the entire panel onto a black licorice card base. This card measures 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, which is the standard A2 size card. Okay, so now we went through how to create the panels, how to create one of our cards. I just want to go through the other 2 cards that I created. So this one here, I decided to go a little bit out of the box, and I used a large portion of the panel that we created with the pink, and I adhered that on the bottom portion of my card. I then took the watermelon die and die cut a bunch of black seeds, and I just added those in a random pattern, which is not really that random. I have it pretty lined up just because I prefer that, but you can definitely make it a little bit more scattered and not have them as completely aligned as I have them. And then I used the green panel and cut a few strips of that to add up to the top to make it look like the rind. And then I added a sentiment both stamped and die cut in the center area. I love this one just because it gives the look of the watermelon, but we didn't actually use the watermelon die. We just used the panels and really let them stand out on the card. So now you can see the 2 different versions of both the watermelon as well as the larger area where we've really highlighted that pink panel. Now for the last card, I have these 2 pieces here, and you can see I didn't have enough of the panel left to cut out the entire watermelon piece, but that's not going to matter because even if we were keeping it completely whole, the pink piece layers over top, so you would never see the area of the green that kind of cuts out. But we're going to use the little bite die that comes in this set, and we're going to cut the edge of that off anyway, so it's really not going to matter at all. So the first thing I did is I took the pink and added the adhesive on the back, and I'm just adhering that directly to the green piece. And then I'm going to take the little bite die and I'm going to tuck it over top of the corner of this die. I want it to cut down a bit, so I'm going to actually stick the die cut piece right through the die, and I'm going to run it through my die cut machine just like that. And then when I remove it, you can see that we get this really cool effect on the edge where it looks like someone has taken a bite out of it. And then I'm just going to take that piece there and we're going to turn that into a card as well. I kept this one super simple. I just adhered the die cut piece with a stamped sentiment strip to a white cardstock panel, and then I adhered that directly onto a Limelight card base. And then I also added some clear droplets to both this card and the first one that we created, just for a little bit of added dimension. So let's go ahead and take one more look at all 3 of the cards we were able to create from just those 2 panels. We have the original one with the half watermelon. We have the middle one there that has the full panel watermelon, and then we have the final one that we were able to use what was left of the panels to create a cool watermelon that has a bite out of it. So just a really fun way to use those Distress Oxide glazed panels to create a really realistic watermelon look on these 3 cards. There are so many different ways that you could use these panels, so many different color combinations you could use. I definitely encourage you to give this technique a try if you haven't already. As always, the supplies I've used are listed in the video description below. I appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Thanks so much for watching.